And what Roosevelt did in 33 was say, okay, you're going to pay a reasonable fee. They were charging 4%, 5% mortgages. The banks will, because they lost their mortgages, they're going to get these bonds, and that's it. And then it's all guaranteed, and the housing market recovered, and people stopped losing their homes. And when people stop losing their homes, you can't. I was just in 8 Mile, Detroit. I got one guy who's he has a $100,000 mortgage from Bank of America Countrywide. Banks are paying 0% interest. Nominally, they're paying 1/4 of 1% interest to borrow from the government. And yes, that's what Bank of America pays. If Bank of America's Countrywide unit is charging this guy 14% interest on a mortgage, $100,000 mortgage on a home he couldn't sell tomorrow for $30,000 because there's 4 foreclosed homes on his street.
And it's all fiat money. So in the limited time we have you here, go back over the IMF World Bank documents that were leaked to you in 2002, your warnings about this coming here, where you see this going, criminal probes of Goldman Sachs, but most of the regulators are former Goldman Sachs. This civil suit, is that just a whitewash? Where is all this going? Because the bankers are saying, let them eat cake. They've set up the euro, as you talked about, one of the top people involved in it, openly admitting to you that it's about cornering countries and imploding them through economic conquest.
That's right. Well, and in fact, let me start with the Goldman business. What they've done is instead of saying that the system is rotten, the system of creating these securities which are not backed by any assets, and it's basically backed by the taxpayer, because the bet is wrong, we pay. We have $160 trillion of derivative securities. That's a lot more than the Earth produces every year in products worldwide, okay? A heck of a lot more. So even a 5% wrong, if it's 5% up, these guys literally make trillions. If it's 5% down, we have to back them up or they implode. That's their statement to us. What they're doing with this Goldman action on the criminality is that they're going to say, well, a couple of the trades were no good. It's the old game. They're going to take this one French trader from Goldman, and they're going to hang him out to dry, and a couple people, and that'll be it. But they're not going to say that the system itself is per se rotten. They're not going to say that subprime mortgages are predatory and on their face illegal. By the way, that's what Elliot Spitzer is about to file a 50-state lawsuit the week that they nailed him for not keeping his zipper up. They had that information for a long, long time. They waited for that moment. So when it gets to the IMF documents that we're able to get, and the IMF has never denied the authenticity of the documents, nor the World Bank, is that these documents, which are confidential, which you can see in my book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, or our Madhouse, or go to my website, which I put on BBC television, by the way.
Yeah, give us your website, Greg.
Right. www.gregpalast.com. GregPalast.com. And we did this for BBC. And what we were able to find is that basically you have right in the documents, for example, we took the country of Ecuador, that's just one of the countries, where they said, okay, we're going to squeeze this country and you're going to have riots. And then once we have the riots, then we could take strong measures because obviously then the military can move in. So it was like a planned-in riot. And I spoke to the chief economist, the former chief economist of the World Bank, Joe Stiglitz, who just a couple of years ago, before he got his Nobel Prize. This is not, a fruitcake, off-the-wall guy. He's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, head of the World Bank, chief economist of the World Bank. He said, yeah, we used to call that the IMF riot. He said that's kind of built into the process. You squeeze nations like Greece, Ecuador, and by the way, Florida and California until they explode. Okay? And then you have the explosion, and then you can come in third world nations, you come in with the military, suddenly you have the IMF, teams of IMF emergency people come in, no one can object to the austerity measures, as they call them, which is basically just sucking, like you say, you just suck out everyone's pension funds. It's Chile.
And we're now seeing these headlines that America needs austerity, and we have the IMF head saying they're going to do that here. We have the head of the European Central Bank saying world government of and for and by the banks, Gordon Brown saying global constitution. of the bank. So these Ponzi scheme guys create more wealth than actually exists in the world. They buy everything up, then they implode it and say, now you've got to give us your pension funds or because we're holding a financial gun to your head. But then when you give them the money, they pull the trigger and shoot you in the head, and the whole thing's engineered. Do you see them engineering IMF-style riots here in the U.S.?
I don't think they need to. I think that they're going to, they've obviously gotten a hold of money without it. I mean, we kind of go willingly. These other nations, I've been to places like Ecuador, and they're just more willing to go into the street, burn cars when they raise the price of cooking oil in Ecuador. The Indians came out of the hills and burnt down the capital. Americans kind of shrug their shoulders and say, well, that's what happens. I mean, when you have 10% unemployment officially, and you have entire states like Michigan shut down, and people are kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying that's life. I mean, I talked to this guy, Robert Pratt, who was an auto worker and who's facing these foreclosures. He doesn't know. He said he doesn't know where he's going to go. He's going to have to live in a motel room with his family of 5 kids. And he didn't engineer this. He was an auto worker.
And it's only going to get worse. There are VAT taxes, carbon taxes that Ken Lay thought up. It just goes, they control the left, they control the right. But see, Americans have never been financially fleeced like this. I mean, the government that I know of never taken pension funds. They're now in Bloomberg proposing it. That's where I see all this going. And then that'll destroy the market even more, destroy confidence even more, which is exactly what the bankers want. Why can't we just arrest all these criminals? I mean, Ron Paul's agreed with me on air that they've committed a lot of crimes on record. Greg Palast, stay with us. We'll come right back and talk more with Greg Palast. He's been warning about this for more than a decade. And 8 years ago, he got the IMF documents that prove this is premeditated. Now we have the Goldman Sachs doing the same thing. Greg Palast has got to get on a plane and fly up to Alaska. He's hot on the trail of the BP oil spill. GregPalast.com is the website. Our website's Infowars.com. We'll talk about that in the next 5 minutes, the next little short segment, then he's got to go. Halliburton may be culprit in oil rig explosion. That's been out the last few days with the cement they were pouring. But, I mean, Greg, look, they're so out in the open, hundreds of billions of dollars of stolen money that went to bonuses. They won't say where the money went, the rest of it. Why are they so arrogant? Why are they getting away with this? And how do we bring these guys to justice before they destroy the economy by design?
Well, people are pretty passive, as one. But the other is that people don't have information. Information, to me, is the powerful weapon here. They control the media. For example, you've got the media keeps talking, hearing from this guy, Peter Peterson. He's head of something called the Concord Coalition, talking about how we have to get rid of entitlements. That's basically taking away your Social Security and your veterans pensions and your veterans benefits. That's you know what? You are entitled to your entitlements. I'm sorry. You paid into your Social Security. It's an insurance plan, and they want to take it away. Well, who's Peter Peterson? He's a billionaire investment banker. So in other words, you shouldn't get the money. He should. They don't tell you that. This guy's fighting against entitlement. Well, what he's saying is, turn over your pension to me. When they talked about privatizing the pension plans, they were talking about basically, Paul Krugman saying, hey, this doesn't make any sense numerically. You can't make more money in the U.S. stock market than the government in its bonds. Well, the answer is they weren't going to keep it in the U.S. They were going to send it to China, where there's more money.
Well, it's worse than that. I mean, I've tracked these big banks the last 100 years. They lobby for big government. They lobby for cities to take most of the tax money in the states and invest it in these comprehensive annual financial report funds. And then the public's only told about the budget, not all these other investments. I mean, this is just pure criminality. Yeah, I mean, basically they're using the state. You're right. They use the state budget as piggy banks for their speculation. And I see it in Europe, where I also work with the BBC, where Finland found its pension funds just sucked away on derivatives. They didn't even know what they were buying. So and the money doesn't disappear. I mean, this idea that it doesn't disappear, it's going into someone's pocket. It doesn't simply evaporate. This is a big shift in wealth. Well, here's the problem, Greg, as you've studied and know. They will destroy a country. They will take a first world nation like Argentina and reduce it down into a third world hellhole. They will do that here if we don't stop them. But I guess you're just saying it's just going to happen.
Well, no, I think if people are informed. I mean, one thing I've traveled around the world. Americans are actually impressive in one way, that they are reactive. They get the information. That's why they, as Daniel Ellsberg says, the good thing about Americans is that you have to lie to them. The bad thing is that it's fairly easy to do. So that's the problem, is that, we're surrounded by a media which keeps saying the same thing. Get rid of entitlements. The Greek workers are guilty. So it goes on and on. People have borrowed too much money for their homes; they deserve to lose them. Blaming the victims constantly, as opposed to, and the poor banks. We have to save the financial system when they don't mean that at all. They mean save the financiers. That's the big problem. People just don't have the information.